The American GI did not walk into battle like a movie hero with one rifle and a clean uniform. He carried steel, wool, canvas, food, water, tools, personal memories, and enough awkward gear to make a modern backpacker cry. And yes, some of it saved lives, while some of it was basically government-issued misery with straps. 48 items. Every specification, every detail, every piece of kit. Let's get into it. We have this famous steel helmet, often called the steel pot, and it became one of the most recognizable American combat items of World War II. It used a hard outer steel shell with a separate liner inside, which helped protect the head from fragments, debris, and rough field conditions. It was not magic armor, obviously, but compared to going bareheaded into artillery fire, it was a very welcome piece of metal. Next, we have the M1941 Field Jacket, a short olive-drab cotton jacket lined with wool flannel for moderate cold weather. It looked sharp, but in real combat it was not warm enough, not rugged enough, and not exactly a miracle when rain and mud joined the party. Many American soldiers wore it early in the war, especially before improved field clothing became more common. Let's continue with the M1943 Combat Jacket, which was designed as a better, longer, more practical combat jacket. It had larger pockets, a looser fit, and worked as part of a layered uniform system, which was much more sensible than pretending one thin jacket could defeat Europe in winter. By late war, it became one of the most important upgrades in American field clothing. We have this herringbone twill uniform, usually called HBT, and it was made from tough cotton fabric with a visible woven pattern. It was widely used for fatigue duty, training, hot weather service, and combat, especially in places where wool uniforms were too hot or too slow to dry. It was not glamorous, but it handled sweat, dirt, and hard work better than fancy parade clothing ever could. Next, we have the wool service uniform, the basic wool shirt and trousers worn by many American soldiers. Wool helped keep men warm and could still insulate when damp, which mattered when the weather became miserable, because apparently war needed bad weather too. In combat, soldiers often wore wool under field jackets, HBT clothing, or heavier outer layers depending on the theater. Let's continue with the M1943 combat boots, which combined a leather boot with an attached buckle cuff at the top. They were meant to replace the older low-service shoes worn with separate leggings, making the soldiers' footwear simpler and more protective. They were still boots, not clouds, so long marches could punish feet badly. We have these canvas leggings, worn over low-service shoes to keep dirt, stones, and mud out, while giving the ankle some support. They were common earlier in the war, especially before double-buckle combat boots became more available. Soldiers often hated putting them on and taking them off, because apparently the enemy was not the only thing wasting time. Next, we have the M1936 Pistol Belt, a web belt used by officers, vehicle crews, paratroopers, medics, and soldiers not carrying the rifle cartridge belt. It could hold a canteen, first aid pouch, pistol holster, ammunition pouches, and other small equipment. Basically, it was the canvas foundation for carrying everything except your regrets. Next, we have the M1936 suspenders, designed to support the belt and distribute weight across the shoulders. They were used with the pistol belt, musette bag, and other field equipment, especially by airborne, mechanized, and specialist troops. Without suspenders, a loaded belt could sag badly, and nobody wants to fight while constantly pulling up government-issued canvas. Let's continue with the M1923 Cartridge Belt, one of the key infantry load-bearing items for riflemen. It had pockets designed to carry clips of rifle ammunition and could also support attached gear like the canteen and first aid pouch. For a GI armed with the M1 rifle, this belt was not decoration, it was the ammunition lifeline. We have the M1 Garand Rifle, the standard American infantry rifle, and one of the most important small arms of World War II. It was a gas-operated semi-automatic rifle firing the .30 caliber cartridge from an 8-round en-bloc clip. While many enemies still relied heavily on bolt-action rifles, the American riflemen could fire faster, which was a very serious advantage and not just patriotic bragging. Next, we have the M1 Bayonet knife, a 10-inch blade bayonet made for the M1 rifle after the older 16-inch bayonets proved a little too much sword and not enough practical tool. It could be fixed to the rifle or carried in its scabbard as part of the soldier's equipment. In real combat, it was far less important than firepower, but psychologically, it still said, "Please do not get any closer." Let's continue with the M3 fighting knife, a combat knife issued especially to troops who did not carry a bayonet-compatible rifle. It was associated with soldiers armed with weapons like the M1 carbine, submachine guns, or other specialist arms. It was a rugged close-quarter and utility blade, not some fantasy movie superweapon, which is probably disappointing to Hollywood. We have the Mark II Fragmentation Grenade, the famous pineapple-style American hand grenade of World War II. It was used to project fragments in close combat situations, especially against enemy positions, trenches, and fortified areas. For safety and policy reasons, this script keeps it historical only, because this is education, not a terrible instruction manual. Next, we have the M1 Carbine, a light semi-automatic weapon chambered for the .30 Carbine cartridge. It was issued to officers, support troops, radio operators, paratroopers, vehicle crews, and others who needed something lighter than a full-size rifle. It was handy and popular, though not as powerful as the M1 Garand, because physics is rude like that. Let's continue with the M1942 First Aid Pouch, a small canvas pouch carried on the belt. It was meant to hold the Carlisle First Aid dressing, giving the soldier an emergency bandage for immediate wound care. It was small, simple, and deadly serious, because in battle, the first medical item you reached for could matter fast. We have these sulfa drug packets, commonly associated with wound care in American field medicine during World War II. Sulfonilamide powder was issued to help reduce infection risk before a wounded soldier could reach proper medical treatment. It was not a miracle cure, but before modern antibiotics became widely available, it was a major improvement over just hoping for the best. Next, we have the 1-quart canteen, one of the most basic and most important items a GI carried. It came from the M1910 equipment system and was made in different wartime materials, including aluminum, steel, and some plastic versions. A rifle is useless if the soldier carrying it collapses from thirst, which is a detail war movies sometimes treat as optional. Let's continue with water purification tablets, often halazone tablets, carried to make questionable water safer to drink. They were especially important when clean water was not available in the field, which was often. The taste was not exactly luxury dining, but stomach illness in combat was a much worse menu item. We have the K-ration, a boxed individual ration designed for short-term use by mobile troops. It came in breakfast, dinner, and supper units, with items such as biscuits, canned meat, coffee, sugar, gum in some versions, and other compact foods. It was convenient, but soldiers quickly got tired of it, because eating cardboard-adjacent survival food for days is not exactly a restaurant experience. Next, we have the C-ration, a canned individual combat ration used widely by American troops. It usually included canned meat or stew components, with biscuits, beverages, sweets, and accessory items depending on the period and packing. It was heavier than the K-ration, but it was more substantial, which soldiers appreciated until they had to carry it another hill. Let's continue with the M1948 Ration Emergency Chocolate Bar, a high-energy emergency ration designed to resist melting and discourage casual snacking. It was made to be eaten when normal food was unavailable, not because the army suddenly became generous with dessert. Soldiers often joked about its taste and hardness, which tells you plenty. We have this wartime canteen cup, often associated with 1942 steel production changes in the older canteen system. It nested with the canteen and could be used for hot drinks, soup, or field cooking when conditions allowed. It was one of those humble items that looked boring until a cold soldier needed coffee. Next, we have the M1943 entrenching tool, the folding shovel introduced during the war with its own carrier. It could be used for digging fighting positions, foxholes, drainage, and basic field work. It was not exciting, but if artillery was incoming, that little shovel suddenly became your best friend. Let's continue with the M1910 Pick Mattock, a heavier digging tool used where a simple shovel was not enough. It was not normally carried by every rifleman all the time, but it appeared in engineer, pioneer, and field equipment use when harder ground or construction work demanded it. Basically, when the Earth refused to cooperate, the Army brought a more convincing argument. We have the shelter half, one half of the famous pup tent system. One soldier carried one half, and two soldiers could combine their shelter halves to make a small tent. It was cramped, basic, and not romantic at all, but it could keep rain off better than complaining. Next, we have the tent stakes and poles, the little parts that made the shelter half system actually work. They were carried with the shelter equipment and helped support the pup tent in the field. Lose them, and suddenly your shelter was just a sad piece of canvas having an argument with the weather. Let's continue with the wool blanket, a heavy but important piece of bedding and warmth. It could be rolled with the pack and used in cold camps, field bivouacs, or rest areas behind the line. It added weight, but freezing at night was not exactly great for morale or survival. We have the M1945 sleeping bag, but this one needs an accuracy note. It appeared at the very end of World War II period and became more strongly associated with post-war service and Korea than with the average GI's combat load in earlier campaigns. So yes, it belongs near the late war equipment story, but no, every Normandy rifleman was not strolling around with one. Next, we have the M1A2 gas mask, part of the protective mask equipment American soldiers could be issued for chemical defense. Large-scale gas warfare did not happen on the World War II battlefield the way many feared, but troops still trained and prepared for that possibility. The mask and carrier were bulky, uncomfortable, and often hated because apparently breathing safely also needed to be inconvenient. Let's continue with the M1938 lensatic compass, a navigation tool used by leaders, scouts, and soldiers who needed reliable direction in the field. It helped with map reading, movement, and orientation when roads, signs, and landmarks were not enough. Not every rifleman carried one, but for the men who needed it, getting lost was not a charming side quest. We have the signaling mirror, a small reflective device used to attract attention over distance when visual signaling was possible. It was especially useful in survival kits, emergency situations, and communication when other methods failed. It was simple, silent, and surprisingly effective, provided the sun decided to show up for duty. Next, we have the AN/PRC-6, and here is the honest historical correction. It was not a standard World War II GI battle radio. The AN/PRC-6 belongs to the post-war and Korean War era, developed after World War II as a successor to earlier handheld sets. So if someone puts it in a normal World War II infantry loadout, congratulations, they've just time-traveled their radio. Let's continue with the SCR-536, also known with the BC-611 unit, the real American handheld handy-talkie of World War II. It was used by the U.S. Army Signal Corps and issued to leaders or specialists who needed short-range voice communication. It was not carried by every GI, but when it worked in the right situation, it gave small units a faster voice than shouting across chaos. We have the M1910 Mess Kit, the folding metal eating kit carried by American soldiers. It served as a plate and pan combination, with utensils carried separately or with the soldier's gear. It was simple, durable, and probably saw more bad meals than any man should legally witness. Next, we have dog tags, the identification tags worn by American servicemen. They carried personal identification information so a soldier could be identified if wounded, killed, or separated from his unit. They were small pieces of metal, but emotionally, they carried the weight of a man's entire name. Let's continue with the toothbrush and dental powder, basic hygiene items that soldiers carried when conditions allowed. Dental care mattered because infections and tooth problems could make a soldier ineffective even without enemy action. It was not glamorous, but neither is losing a tooth in a muddy foxhole. We have soap, one of the simplest and underrated field items. It helped soldiers clean their hands, bodies, clothing, and mess gear when water and time were available. In a war full of mud, sweat, lice, fuel, and canned food, soap was not luxury. It was civilization in a tiny bar. Next, we have the razor, usually part of a soldier's personal grooming gear. Shaving was encouraged for discipline, hygiene, and proper gas mask seal when chemical protection mattered. Of course, staying clean-shaven near the front was easier on paper, and paper was not being shelled. Let's continue with the clothing repair kit, often called a housewife kit by soldiers. It usually contained small sewing items like needles, thread, buttons, and patches for repairing uniforms and gear. In the field, a torn strap or ripped trouser seam could become a real problem because the Army did not issue dignity replacements on demand. We have personal letters and photographs, not official combat equipment, but absolutely real items carried by many soldiers. These connected a GI to home, family, girlfriends, wives, parents, and the life he hoped to return to. Among all the steel and canvas, these were often the most human things in his pockets. Next, we have cigarettes, extremely common among American troops and even included in some ration accessory packs during the war. They were used for stress, boredom, trade, and morale in a time when smoking was culturally normal and heavily accepted. Today, we know the health cost clearly, but in World War II, the cigarette was practically treated like portable morale with smoke. Let's continue with the Zippo lighter, a popular private purchase item among American servicemen. It was wind-resistant, sturdy, refillable, and useful for lighting cigarettes, fires, or small field tasks. Not every GI had one, but many wanted one because a lighter that worked in bad weather was basically pocket-sized confidence. Next, we have insect repellent, especially important in mosquito-heavy theaters like the Pacific and other disease risk areas. World War II troops faced malaria, dengue, lice, fleas, and other pests that could disable men without a single shot being fired. It smelled unpleasant and felt greasy, but disease prevention mattered more than smelling like a department store. Let's continue with the prophylactic kit, a real medical and public health item issued to reduce venereal disease among troops. It was not glamorous, and it was not something old war movies usually pause to explain for obvious reasons. But for the Army, disease prevention was a manpower issue, because a soldier in a hospital from preventable infection was one less soldier available for duty.